it's okay with you guys, I wanted to do the suggestion box. I got 3 questions in the suggestion box. And in case you don't know, we have a suggestion box on the tea table in this lovely blonde wood with a little metal Buddha on top. And there should be a pencil and a sharpener. And please feel free to put suggestions, questions, comments, recommendations. I got one that was just so complimentary and kind, and I'll skip it. But I'm going to take it home and like hold it under my pillow. But at the very end, it said, oftentimes when I'm sitting on the ground on a cushion, my legs fall asleep. Do you know if there is a way to prevent this? Yeah. Sit differently. There's lots of different ways to sit on the ground. I don't sit on the ground because my legs don't do that. So maybe even figuring out what specific anatomical situation, which hip flexor or what's going on is tight that's causing your hips and your knees to fight. And even just getting used to sitting a certain way and not moving takes a while. Like being able to sit still is an actual skill. And it's not something that a lot of us have. It's funny, if you put somebody on a time lapse and you tell them to sit still, and I've seen this before, we don't know how much we fidget. We're actually constantly moving to mitigate and kind of negotiate small discomforts in the body. So actually sitting still is really tough. So thank you. Great question. And yeah, I mean, if you're sitting cross-legged, try kneeling posture, for instance. Lots of different ways to sit. Luckily for us, the old man was very loose about how to sit. He used to say the 4 postures. Cultivate this mind of awakening and this heart of loving kindness in all 4 postures: sitting, standing, lying down, and walking. It's pretty open, right? So you figure out what works for you. I got a request. I would like to hear teachings on the 3 poisons, alternately known as the 3 fires. Is there anyone in this room who's never heard that term? Stop. Have I really failed you? Wow. Okay, that's my fault. So in ancient times, before the advent of the Buddha, in the traditional Brahminical kind of proto-Hindu tradition of India, there were these 3 fires that the Brahmins, the priest caste, were told never to let go out. And there were these 3 sacred fires that symbolized the sun, the moon, and wisdom. And they were actual fires, like one of the big things, which is interesting how common that is all over the Near East, right? You talk about Zoroastrians, they have the sacred fire that they never let go out in their temples. All these traditions all over this world probably had a lot of exchange with each other. Anyway, so there's this idea of never letting these sacred fires go out. And in classic Buddhist style, who was born and raised in that tradition, in that kind of pan-Hindu Brahminical tradition, he would take in these teachings and then put his spin on it, usually a reversal or a subversion of the faith of his fathers. He was the world's first punk rocker, basically. And his idea, his conception was, no, there are 3 fires that must be put out: the fire of greed, the fire of hatred, and the fire of delusion. So his whole conception is that we are on fire, and the world is on fire with these 3 fires that have to be extinguished, which is one of the reasons why nirvana, one of the earliest ways of kind of conceptualizing it, is a fire gone out. And just briefly, the way the Buddha talks about it is when our mind meets something that we want, it's like the way a fire catches a log, right? In the ancient world, there very clearly was this idea of a fire when it latches onto something. It's like caught, and the fire is caught. Where'd it come from? Fire always happens when there's fuel, oxygen, and friction sufficient to make a spark. But when a fire goes out, where does it go? So similarly, the Buddha was like, that's your mind. Your mind is like that fire. When you see something that you want, and then you lust after it, and you get attached, and you start to think, how are you going to get it? And he's going to try to get it, so I have to get it before him. Is there anyone in this room who's ever suffered because of something they really wanted? Yeah, me too. All the time. So for the Buddha, this was an example of, if you can simply remove one of those three things from this equation, the fuel or the spark or the oxygen, it'll just go out on its own. Similarly, the fire of aversion, the fire of hatred. We see something we don't like, and all of a sudden we mobilize. If you ever go to work and you see that person that you can't stand, and your whole physiology and your whole brain chemistry shifts. I'll speak for myself. When I see that person and I'm like, oh my God, why are they here today? And I have this whole flip out. And the only person suffering is me. How can I let go? How can I extinguish that fire? And then there's the fire of delusion, which is at the root of both of them. The fire of delusion basically being that kind of objectifying, dualistic othering that we do habitually. That I do habitually when I see someone who's different than me, and I kind of get caught by this delusion that I'm not you and you're not me and we're different, and that means that now we are in opposition. You don't want what I want and I want what this whole, and you see it every day. The world looks very solid. It's full of money and buildings and bombs and people, but actually the world is made of delusion, clinging, and aversion. People every day are killed in wars because I think that those people on the other side of that imaginary line are different from me. Really good point. It's easy to get involved in meditative practice and really get a whole overly intense, diligent kind of trip about it. But the way it was kind of pointed out, like to me, reminds me of, it's like, imagine there's a fire and you're just pulling logs out. It'll burn out on its own. You don't have to blow it out. You don't have to cover it with water. Just stop. Just refrain from adding more fuel, and it'll burn out on its own. So extinguishment was one of the early kind of ways of thinking about nibbana. So anyway, that's for whoever requested a teaching on the three poisons or the three fires. It's also called the three poisons in later traditions, different ways of thinking about it. But thank you very kindly.